Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Dick, and on behalf of my fellow co founders, Scott Silverman and Veronica Sonsev, as well as the rest of the entire Commerce Next team, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. Today is Wednesday, September 13th, 2023, and our topic this week is Innovate to Accelerate, how encouraging new ideas can ignite revenue growth. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to welcome and thank today's speakers. First off, we have Roshan Varma. He's retail expert and former VP Digital and Customer Platforms and Analytics. Rima Reddy, principal at Commerce Ventures. Rachel Moore, SVP, Head of Incubation at Synchrony. And Tim Christensen, SVP Product, Digital, and Innovation, also at Synchrony. Thank you as well to Synchrony for sponsoring today's webinar. We could not bring these webinars to you without the support of sponsors like Synchrony. It has been a real pleasure working with Jason, Rachel, and Tim on this webinar, and I'm looking forward to their participation today. I also want to thank the Commerce Next staff, Veronica, Scott, Maeve, and Robert, who are all off screen helping to make this webinar a success. Most of all, I want to thank you, the audience, for being with us today. This is who we do it for, and we appreciate you being here. Now, before we review today's agenda, just want to remind you that our YouTube channel has over 330 videos covering topics such as acquisition, retention, leadership, retail technology, and so much more. 50 of these, actually over 50 of these, are from our June conference alone, so there's a lot of fresh knowledge in there for you to tap into. Click in the link in the chat to visit our YouTube channel to learn more. All right, here's today's agenda. First off, we're going to start with Tim and Rachel discussing, laying out their theory and practice of how Synchrony approaches innovation. After that, we're going to get your perspective on innovation with a couple of poll questions. And finally, we have our expert panel discussion where we'll dive into the more strategy and tactics that you can use to encourage useful innovation at your company. A couple of housekeeping notes for you. Now, don't worry about missing anything. As always, we're recording this webinar. Make it available by tomorrow. Most likely, Rob will get this thing done tonight and ship it out to you. You will get an email about that. And next, let's take a moment to show you where things are on your screen. Now, for those of you that are new to our webinar series, let's take a moment to review the functionality tabs that are located at the top right of your screen. There are 4 of them: Chat, Q&A, Polls, and Handouts. Now, please use the Chat tab when you want to communicate with other attendees. Use the Q&A tab when you want to ask the speakers a question. The Polls tab is where you can participate in polls and review results. And the Handouts tab is where you have today's presentation and other materials available for you to download. Now, one important thing to remember: you can show your interest in a specific question by upvoting it. This helps me prioritize which questions to present to the panel. And I'll take a side note here. Think of this panel as your kind of personal board of advisors or a focus group on innovation. We are here to answer your questions. We're here for you. Let's get those questions in. If you like what someone else is asking, make sure you upvote it. It really does help us with the making sure we prioritize what's important to you. Finally, if you're watching this on the replay, please note that the handouts are available by clicking on the highlighted document icon in the video player. Alrighty. All right, let's welcome Tim Christensen and Rachel Moore. They're going to discuss Synchrony's approach to innovation. Hello, how are you two doing today?
Hello, thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for joining us on your iPhones. I know we were having some issues earlier, but looking sharp and looking good. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you, and I'll see you guys in about 15 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much. We are thrilled to be here. It is quite an honor to talk to all of you about how we approach innovation at Synchrony. So let's move to the next page and we'll quickly walk you through our brief agenda. So Tim and I will go a little bit deeper into our intros and ourselves, and then we will talk a little bit about Synchrony as a company, and then we'll spend most of our time just talking about the framework for innovation, including concepts like the minimum viable product and how we put that into practice here. So let's go to the next page and we will start with our intros and our beautiful biopics, right? So I am Rachel Moore. I'm Synchrony's head of incubation. I joined in November of 22, so I've been here a little less than a year. I was previously at Chase, where I led the branch innovation team there, and then I spent about 7.5 years at Citi and 8.5 years at American Express. So I like to say I come from the business. We were also asked to include a fun fact. So for some reason, people think it's just hilarious that I did synchronized swimming in middle school. Not only did I do synchronized swimming, I did it with my mom, and we would perform in mother-daughter routines. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And it's great to be here. And in some ways, you and I are a little bit of opposites of each other. You've been here for a year. I've actually been at Synchrony for about 19 years, running parts of our technology organization. I lead our technology team that does all of our product development, our digital development, innovation, and AI work. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been focused on building and leading our structured approach to how we support innovation across Synchrony. I am not a synchronized swimmer, and then I'm in technology, you're in product. And so we collaborate fairly well as we kind of go about this strategy for our business.
Awesome. Before we leave this page, there are two things about our org structure, though, that I do want to talk about because I think org design is very important, a very foundational point to how you structure innovation. So one is what Tim just mentioned. We have completely distinct functions, but they're very complementary. So in most innovation teams, you will find that you need sort of the voice of the business and technology working hand in hand. And then secondly, we are very integrated teams, and you do tend to see that innovation teams can structure themselves in a number of different ways, and we are very much in the businesses that we are in. I report into the product org, so we're very looped in to the broader initiatives and strategies happening at Synchrony and sort of know who and which team would take our concepts and run. So I just wanted to touch on org structure before we dove into other parts. So we can flip to the next page, get our pictures off the screen. Excellent. So I will spend just a few moments going level setting on Synchrony as a business. So Synchrony is a huge financial services company. We enable consumer financing for our hundreds of partners across a broad spectrum of industries. And are completely integrated into our partners, channels, and ecosystems. By the numbers, we are a 90-year-old company coming from GE. We have over 18,000 employees and continue to be named one of the best companies to work for. And we touch over 70 million customers. So this inherently gives us a huge innovation opportunity considering not only our scale, but in the range of our partnerships and the potential to impact so many industries. Let's flip to the next page. So now we will transition to how we approach innovation at Synchrony, and I will turn it to Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So I'm going to kick off with the first couple pages just to talk a little bit about the process we follow around how we define innovation and how we organize around it. And for us, innovation is certainly not one thing. It's not one team in the organization, even though Rachel here and I are talking about our teams and how we support it, is actually much broader than that. It's not only about the big ideas either, right? We've been very deliberate about saying our approach is not about trying to create a walled off team that's looking for the moonshots. We're looking for the big ideas and the small ideas, and that comes from every corner of the organization. If you go to the next page, we've always believed that innovation is a process for us. It's not random. And so we need ways to talk about it with the organization, ways to make decisions on what to focus on, what we can communicate up and down within the organization. And we'll actually use some of the same language we're going to talk about here in these couple of pages. We'll use to talk with our board of directors, and we'll use the same language to talk to the teams that are developing these solutions at the same time. So one of the first things we do in our process is we actually define these time horizons for innovation. And it's a way for us of defining when do we think certain technologies or emerging trends are going to impact our business. It's subjective, it's our opinion on these. It changes often and things move between these time horizons. And the reason we do this is that it allows us to then apply different tools and approaches to how we explore based on where things fit within those horizons, which I'll get to in a moment on the next page. Horizon one being right now, it's innovations that are happening in the current year. Horizon three is on the other end of that spectrum, right? It's innovations or trends that we think are 4 or 5 years out, where we don't yet know how they may impact our business or how we would even commercialize it. And then in the middle, you have Horizon two, which is 2 or 3 years out, and often the most challenging space. This is where ideas sometimes have a tendency to get stuck because we know enough about the trend or the technology and how it will impact our business. We have concepts on how we think we want to explore it, but there's that opportunity cost of taking teams off other work to focus on the space. And so Where the inputs come from on here, they come from everywhere for us. As Rachel mentioned, our business touches a lot of different industries, a lot of different customers. So we'll talk to our clients, we'll talk to our direct customers, we'll talk to our ventures teams. We really take ideas from everywhere in terms of what trends are important and where they should fit in these horizons. If you go to the next page, once we have those horizons, then there's a couple of different tools that we've found over the years that we apply against those, because the same innovation approach doesn't work for everything in every horizon. So for us, if something is in horizon 1, that's where we're going to align our existing, what we call our agile teams, but are basically our product teams, our existing product teams that have existing backlogs. If a trend's in horizon 1, we should know enough about it, about how our company should respond to it, that our existing teams should have the responsibility to iterate on that and decide if it's valuable or not for them to build into their products. And arguably, horizon 1 is where a majority of innovation happens, right? It's the daily incremental innovations that happen across so many of our different teams. Incubation for us is a very specific process, and that's what we align to horizon 2. Trends that fit in that horizon 2, like I mentioned before, where we have enough of, we know enough about it that we know we need to test something with customers. We know it's an emerging tech trend that could impact us, either a positive or a negative. But we don't understand how customers will adopt it, for example, or how we want to go to market. So product incubation, and Rachel's going to go into a lot more detail on product incubation later in the conversation. This is really the only place in our business where we actually have a fully dedicated team that's isolated to that one specific area of innovation. And for us, their job is to attack that horizon very specifically. Horizon 3, on the other hand, are things that are further out. Here's what we call our innovation practice. And by definition for us, anything that we would put in horizon 3 is exploratory. It means we don't know enough about it yet. We're not going to try to build something real and commercialize it. We're going to engage the broader organization in ways to explore this. That might be through hackathons that we'd run quarterly. It might be through structured rapid ideation sessions, but we're going to engage the broader organization because the expectation here is not that we're going to build something, but that we're going to raise the level of knowledge within the entire organization of these trends in Horizon 3 and how they might impact us in the future. The last thing I'll mention on this page before I move on is what we measure in our process around innovation. What we're focused on is what we call our speed to define. It's how fast can we go from the identification of a trend to defining a minimally viable product to then deciding whether we should move forward or kill it. And any of those outcomes are fine as long as we're moving things through that definition as fast as possible. And that's what we look to measure, not necessarily the outcome of the innovation, but how fast we're moving things through that process. So if you go to the next page, the last piece that I'll talk to is a little bit around after you define those horizons and we have the tools we use against those horizons, the big piece for us is how we then plot the various trends in those horizons. And we've come up with this tool that we use internally that we call our trend radar. And it's similar to an air traffic controller, right? An air traffic controller in Boston and one in New York may have the same plane on their radar, but where it is relative to them is where they're sitting. And so a trend radar for us is how do we look at the different emerging tech trends that are out there and how do they impact our business directly? And everyone else would have a radar that might look a little bit different and how it may impact your business. There's no right or wrong in this process. Oftentimes for us, as we plot things on this radar, it's just an amazing way to start a conversation internally and externally with partners, and we learn about their insight to it. But the way this works is basically we'll take different inputs. You may take technology like the metaverse, for example, or generative AI, and we'll try to plot it on this radar. And the way you read that is from the center circle going out. You have those 3 time horizons, horizon 1, 2, and 3. And then from the left side and right towards the middle, you go from low impact to our business to high impact to our business. And the net of that is you end up with this kind of middle pizza slice that becomes effectively our strike zone, our high impact zone for our business across all 3 of those horizons. And the key of this, what it allows us to then do is then we define that strike zone. We're able to identify the opportunities that we're saying are important to us. It lets us then align those tools that I mentioned previously against those horizons. So something in that high impact horizon 3, that's where we're going to do a hackathon. And something in horizon 2, that's high impact, that's where we're going to use our incubation team. But maybe most importantly, it allows us to show intentionality to the organization on what are we focusing on, and just as important, what are we choosing not to focus on because we've said it's not high impact to us. So a little bit about just some of the tools we use to organize ourselves around it and put some structure around it. And I think Rachel is going to take us a little bit further into that's a very specific piece in the middle around product incubation and how we attack that.
Thank you, Tim. You can flip to the next slide. So we thought we'd pause for a moment and just touch on what we mean by a minimal viable product. So this is certainly not a new concept, nor is it ours, but we definitely embrace it. And you've seen it interwoven into our presentation, and I'll talk about it even further. But essentially, what a minimum viable product means to us is it's the lowest weight version of the product. It's or the least complicated version of the product that allows you to get to market as quickly as possible to start getting those sort of in the wild learnings about the first question you need to answer so that you can start seeing the potential. So this aligns really nicely to what Tim was just talking about, the speed to decision, right? So a minimum viable examples of ways that you could carve out a minimum viable product are limiting things to only one browser, for example, or only one channel, or only one product, or only one way to authenticate, etc. You don't need to solve for all of it yet. Be super methodical about what you're trying to learn. So just wanted to touch on minimum viable product before we went into a little bit more about incubation specifically at Synchrony. So can you flip to the next page, please? Excellent. So this is our final slide, and I will spend a little bit of time breaking this apart for us. But there is a lot that's core to how we structure our work within incubation. So as Tim mentioned, we are a dedicated team, and so that is important. We catch the work of the new ideas that are coming from a lot of those tools that Tim talked about. So we catch them and we work them in meaningful ways. So at our core, we focus on creating and executing very specific use cases, again, the MVP, that allows us to test relative impact of doing something differently, leveraging the new Horizon 2 high impact technology. So again, I just want to reiterate what Tim talked to. Those strike zones are so important for us because it really allows us to frame and structure our work. If it's not in our strike zone, we won't work it, nor should we, right? There also must be known unknowns, or else the project would go to the teams of today. So we know that we're curious, and we know we need to learn more, and we know that it's highly relevant to our business, and that's where we will dedicate resources from our squad to do it. So to start, we ask ourselves, what's the first thing we need to see in order to know we're onto something? So essentially, this is peeling back the nuances of the customer experience associated with the new feature or product you're launching. So we need to understand where there may be friction that will impact overall demand and adoption. So since we're not yet sure whether we want to commit, our last point here is that we intentionally limit testing to once we see statistical significance. So we're not a team that's looking to drive scale yet. And I think that is an interesting point to pause on because it's not common to all of our ways of working. Like, you launch something new, you want to scale it. It's how we all think and how we're conditioned to think. What we want to do is get enough people using something, which isn't very many. You work with our data and analytics partners to figure out that number. But we need enough people to engage so that we can feel confident that the data is significant enough for us to see whether or not we're onto something. And again, seeing whether or not we're onto something means we're comparing it to how we do something today or even other ways in. And then what's also really important, and this can help with resourcing along the lines too, is that you align the context by which you launch to strategic areas of focus for the business so that everyone else can be a part of the journey with you and understand it. And also so that you know the future home, right? So the future team that would scale it and where it would naturally fit in the business. So that team is interested, they're learning with you, but we are dedicated resources to do the heavy lifting along the way. So that wraps our presentation, and we can turn it back over to Alan.
Hey, thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time to do that presentation for us. I know you have spent quite a bit of time on that, and I was working with you, so I do appreciate it. We don't have any questions from our audience at the moment, so I think what we'll do is we will head over to the polls, and we'll see both of you in just a few moments. All right. And so just a reminder that Commerce Next webinars are meant to be interactive, not just with the polling questions that are coming up, but also, and I think more importantly, by being able to take and answer your questions. Like I said earlier, think of our panelists as your personal focus group or advisory board for all things innovation. Ask your questions and upvote the audience questions you want to put to the panel. Now let's get to our first question. All right, so question number one. What are your motivations for embracing retail innovation? What's motivating you here? Is it increasing sales and revenue, improving customer satisfaction and loyalty, Perhaps it's reducing operational costs. Maybe you want to stay competitive in your market. Maybe it's even just experimentation and curiosity. Or if it's something else, please specify in the chat. So it looks like in the number one position, as one would expect, increasing sales and revenue. Interestingly, right behind it was improving customer satisfaction and loyalty. And then in third place, we have staying competitive in your market, with reducing operational costs and experimentation taking a distant fourth and fifth place. Okay, let's close out that poll and move on to our next one. So, from our last webinar, we asked this: which of the following best describes your organization's approach to innovation? This was from our August 16th webinar. It's the result of this that kind of caught my eye. A third of you said it was proactive, we have a dedicated innovation team, but 25% of you said constrained innovation, meaning that you want to be more innovative, but the resources weren't available. And so, again, to kind of dial in our presentation, I want to ask you this. Question number two: what are the main obstacles to adopting a culture of innovation in your organization? And you can choose all that apply. Is it budget constraints? Is there a resistance to change? Perhaps it's a lack of expertise. Maybe data privacy concerns with the technology involved with most innovation. Maybe it's something else. So let us know in the chat. We'll take a look at that. Or none. We already have a healthy culture of innovation. You're not really seeing those obstacles. So let's take a look at how we're doing here. Again, as one would expect, I kind of figured budgetary restraints would come in number one at 39%, but right behind it, which is kind of interesting, is the resistance to change. And those are the two big ones. Those account for almost two-thirds to three-quarters of the responses. It's a lack of expertise that comes in with only 14% after that, and the rest, yeah, not there. So everyone on this webinar is looking to have a good, healthy innovation environment, but they're having trouble with budgetary constraints and with some resistance to change. Perfect. Thank you so much for taking those polls. Really nice to get the pulse of the audience. Now let's bring on our panel. Rachel, Roshan, Tim, and Rima. How you doing? All right, good to see everyone. Tim and Rachel, we have met you before, so let's introduce our other two panelists. Rima, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, and nice to meet everyone. I'm Rima Reddy. I am a principal at Commerce Ventures, which is a venture capital firm based in the Bay Area. As our name suggests, we focus on investing in commerce enablers. So what that really breaks down to is fintech and relevant to this group, retail tech. So retail tech being B2B SaaS that serves brands and retailers throughout the entire value chain, everything from supply chain, logistics, manufacturing, procurement, to e-commerce infrastructure, e-commerce enablement, in-store technology, returns, post-purchase, customer service, anything that a brand or retailer would need to buy tech-wise, we invest in. Prior to Commerce Ventures, I spent some time at corporate brands. So I was at Ralph Lauren and Marc Jacobs, where I held strategy roles, primarily working with retail tech startups. So really seeing this kind of from your point of view. And I started my career at Goldman Sachs, where I also covered retail.
So you have a little experience in this topic.
Yes.
Just a little bit. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you on board. Another person that's great to see on here, good friend of Commerce Next, very skilled retail operator, Roshan Varma. Roshan, how are you doing today?
Hi, doing great, Alan. Thanks for including me and
Oh,
everyone on the
absolutely.
webinar. Don't adjust your video. I know I'm stepping in for Sarah, who unfortunately couldn't make it, but you got me instead. So thanks for joining. Yeah, Alan asked me over the weekend to join, and I'm always happy to support the Commerce Next community, and was so happy that Coco Golf won the U.S. Open finals, so that I said, of course, I'd be happy to join. As Alan mentioned, career retail professional, worked both in industry and in professional services at multi-branded retailers such as Abercrombie & Fitch and Tapestry, as well as in professional services at the global consulting firm AlixPartners. Happy to be here.
I appreciate it. So this is an unusual topic for Commerce Next to take up. We normally look at like acquisition, retention, some technology, but we don't dive a lot into like heavy strategy. So one of the things I'm trying to accomplish today, and during our prep calls, my side conversations with you, I think we're going to achieve this. We're going to be looking at the strategy of innovation, kind of how to think about it, but also how to actually implement it, how to think about it properly. And so setting that up, I think I want to begin with let's talk about why should retailers innovate? What in fact is innovation? Rima, you have incredibly deep experience in this, and I would kind of love for you to kick off this conversation. What is it, and why should retailers do it, in your opinion?
Yeah. Of course. I think we're all probably pretty familiar with some of the historical examples of brands that didn't innovate. So Kodak, Xerox, Blockbuster are some of kind of my favorites. Xerox, like infamously almost giving away some of its really important innovative tech to Apple, and we all know the story there. So I think it's really important for brands to kind of keep their competitive edge by maintaining a culture of innovation, making sure. And I loved how Tim and Rachel talked a little bit about kind of the different levels of innovation, but making sure that there are exploratory types of innovation to think about, making sure that you're aware of what's coming down the pipe, even if it's 10, 20 years down the road, just to make sure that you're keeping up with it, as well as like really active and proactive innovation in the next year or two, making sure to be testing and learning new things and seeing what actually fits in with your business.
Roshan?
It seems like an obvious question, like why innovate? Of course, need to, but it might not be. Like retail has existed for thousands of years. It's the largest employer in the nation. Lots of problems have been solved already. And I think there's lots of profitability that can be gained by just continuous iteration. And innovation is difficult. I think I'm paraphrasing Star Wars that says there's no creation without destruction. Any innovation means that you're actually destroying something that's already been created that other people have already put in effort to do. The issue is why innovate is because nothing stands still. The world changes. Consumers change, your competitors change, regulation changes. And for a while, you can keep on doing the same thing. But if the world's changing around you, you need to change with it. So you need to be able to be okay with doing the change, doing the destruction, to be able to innovate, to maintain relevance for the future.
So let me ask this question, and this is kind of for everybody. What is the difference in your mind between iteration and innovation? And do you feel that many companies confuse the two or conflate the two? I'll kick that out to anyone who wants to pick that up. Rachel, I see you nodding there. So you got it. You nod, you get the question.
You did warn us about that.
Yeah, I did. We're going off script. It's already started.
Yeah, I do think that happens quite a bit. And I think that's why we're so thoughtful in our strike zones. And we've given space and clear space for what we call iteration, which is, the horizon of the innovation of today. It's all still innovation. I think it's about, that's why the strike zones make so much sense to me. Teams have to focus on different types of work, and we're focused on these trends that no one should necessarily be spending their time on today. And we're a small, nimble team, so you don't need to invest a ton, but you do need focused thoughtfulness on technology or trends that are going to be changing the way people live and shop and experience brands, etc. Because there's a lot to unpack there. You also need to be ready to pounce if we need to be. So we're sort of the team that's working a lot in parallel so that we know how to move when we need to move.
But from a retailer's point of view, actually from any company, but specifically from a retailer's point of view, I think one of the subtexts I was picking up out of all the conversations I've had with the four of you over the past couple of weeks is that there is a real temptation to confuse iteration with innovation. It's like the safe innovation to just take what you've got and build the next thing onto that, as opposed to actively, to Roshan's point, creatively destroying. Rima, have you've again, tapping into this massive body of experience you've got, have you seen that, and what do you think causes that?
Yeah, I mean, we use this phrase in venture capital all the time. Like, is the product actually 10x better than what exists? And if it's not, you probably don't want to invest in it. And I think it's similar from kind of like an iteration versus innovation perspective. To your point, iteration is really just taking what you've been doing and gradually making it better. And there should be room for that. Like, of course, you want to iterate on your existing technologies and processes that are working and continually make them better. But innovation is just such a much bigger concept that you can't necessarily really prove out the ROI within the span of a year or two like you can with iteration, that you can really test and prove that it works. With innovation, it's just a much broader kind of conversation. You have to have various stakeholders included across the organization, and kind of a top-down ability to really allow folks to think big like that.
I agree. Any other commentary, Tim? You
Yeah.
give me the motion
Well,
there. That's why I love seeing
just
you.
to build on that, I think for us, we've found that by giving the room for iteration, you sometimes open the door for the ideas to go into the broader thing. So a lot of what we've done is and we work with a lot of retailers. Like if you get in a room and you ideate on a specific problem, a lot of times that then leads to maybe solving the iterative part of it, but also open the door to the creative solutions that might turn to the bigger innovations. And so if you just focus on the innovation, sometimes you'll get paralyzed and you'll say, how do I go next? What do I need to put against that? We look at those three different horizons for the reason of saying, if you give the room to each of them, you actually may create the room for all those ideas to come forward. I think that's an important part of it.
I think it's really the level of change, which from the poll question, right? That was the second most biggest hurdle that people had. Like the purpose of innovation is to change reality. When you're living in a world with certain facts, processes, scenarios, expected outcomes, and you want to change all of those, not just get better in any specific one area. And for people to want to do innovation, they have to be ready for that uncomfortable, difficult, and risky change.
So let's talk about that. So Rachel and I, when we were talking, came up with and this is probably not the greatest analogy, but I'm going to run with it like a gazelle. So it's kind of like it's like sailing a sailboat. You got to have a tailwind to push it. You got to find a way to fight the headwind. And once you've got those two things done, you got to figure out where you're going. So let's talk about the tailwind first. How do you build consensus in a company to get you moving forward? And obviously it's getting buy-in from the top of it, but I think we talked about some more specific things you could be doing to kind of get the alignment that you're looking for. So let's start with that. How do we build that tailwind? How do we get the company bought in on it? That's a jump ball. Anyone can take it. Oh, don't leave me hanging.
I'll come in. I think organizationally, it's really important to have the stakeholders from each kind of level bought in, and typically one quarterback or one team that's really driving the process forward, because it takes collaboration across so many different units within an overall organization to actually make something happen. Of course, you need the folks that are really building the tech or building the integration. You need kind of, finance to be involved. You need whoever's running your partnership, especially if you're using kind of like an external party. There's so many various parties that are involved, and you really need someone that whose role and responsibility is to drive that process forward. One thing that we've seen as VCs, and we spend a lot of time with corporates and their innovation groups, is sometimes innovation groups can be seen as kind of like ivory tower type folks who are just playing around with cool startups and cool technology, but that they don't actually spend a lot of time executing, or they don't necessarily have the right to work with their colleagues to make things happen, or they have to constantly be like leveraging internal politics to get people to work with them internally, which is unfortunate that they have to kind of use all their resources to be able to fight to make things happen. And so one thing that we've seen that works to combat that is having each business unit, who is typically, really focused on their direct P&L and making numbers for that quarter and what their incentive structure is, to put up a certain percentage of their budget for the year or for the quarter to an organizational innovation budget, so that they are not only from a cultural perspective, but also literally from a financial incentive perspective, incentivized to focus on innovation as well. So it makes it easier to get people's buy-in that way.
I love that suggestion. I really do. I think that's one of those very practical ways that you can go from the nebulous, well, this is kind of what you should be doing, to, okay, now we've got some focus. Now we've got people thinking about this actively versus, yeah, it's a great idea. Roshan, any thoughts on how to build that tailwind up? Rachel, Tim?
I think it's, and to continue with the metaphor, right? Boats are safe in the harbor, but that's not what they're made for. The important thing is to have internal alignment on the destination. Because if you get real alignment internally that you're at one place now and you want to get to a different place, then that can foster the tailwind such that you can enable change to get there.
So when you need to make those cases for the mid or long-term investments, because everyone's worried about the quarter, right? Everyone's worried about making that next number. That my bonus is tied to that. My company performance. Everyone's looking at that immediate return. How do you build that focus on the mid to long term? How do you make that argument? Any thoughts on that, Rachel, Tim?
Yeah. Well, I just say for us, and the way we talked about it earlier, right, is there's a very particular. So our entire innovation strategy is not isolated, right? But there is a core team that's working in that one particular area. That's the hardest to have teams work on, and so that particular area, that's where we're going to protect the investment in that budget to say that team is funded because they have a very specific mandate to go after, which takes the onus off of other teams to say their responsibility is to find capacity to do that work. And so by divvying up the horizons and the areas, you make it easier for teams to tackle the things that they have an ability to tackle, and the things they can't realistically go after. We have a protected team that funding is protected to say that's that team's job to do, but it's narrowly defined.
Yeah.
So
And that,
no, please.
that's why I paused on our org structure in the beginning, just to build on Rima's point. I do feel like there can be a risk if innovation teams are too far isolated. So we are very integrated teams. So we're acutely aware of sort of the business challenges that our internal partners are up against. I am with a broader team that I spend a significant amount of time with. So we're looked at as a connected part of the ecosystem that gets new products out the door. We approach it differently and we're protected. But I think that point of integration is really important because then you can also demonstrate that the areas you're leaning into and the areas you're unpacking and testing have potential to unlock massive opportunities for the business. So you tie it back to the business and sort of speak their language. You're likely to foster the partnerships you need to get the funding.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's so you've got the corporate buy-in, you've got the funding, the other teams are funded, they're interested. We'll come back to direction in a minute because I want to dive into that a bit, but I think there's also still going to be some overall resistance, right? People get comfortable. The bigger the organization, they just do, right? So Susan Threadgill, she's one of our attendees, and thank you, Susan, for the question. She was asking what attributes should be fostered and encouraged to build a culture comfortable with innovation. And personally, I kind of see that as a tailwind and a headwind thing. Like it's one thing that addresses both. If you can get more people behind you, that's fewer people in front of you trying to block you. And so what other ways could we, even if it's simple ways, like even the simpler the better. There was one that came up in conversation. If it doesn't get mentioned, I will bring it up.
I think you
But
might be calling me out. So
maybe.
one thing that I've seen work at organizations is kind of creating almost like an internal platform to drive conversation amongst employees at all levels. And I think there's a lot of wasted talent and folks that are interested in innovation at the more junior and mid levels that often like don't know what to do with it or what to do with their ideas. And I think it's really important to have kind of strategic priorities and not just have, everyone at every level of the organization kind of meeting with startups all the time and just taking, random meetings, but to have those priorities and encourage folks to speak up when they see something that could be a fit and having a portal or some kind of survey or way for people to provide their feedback or what they've seen and kind of drive that process from the ground up. But equally important to have from the top down and to have the C-suite like include that in your bonus structure and your incentives for all employees throughout the organization. So, of course, everyone is incentivized and provided bonuses based on how they make or break their quarter. But, how many, pilots did you run? How many startups did you meet with? How many, like, what did you learn about this quarter? And having that be part of what they present back to their managers and to the C-suite is also equally important.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I think we had during our discussion, I asked the question of, well, how do you overcome the inertia caused by a bonus structure, not an existing bonus structure not aligned with innovation. And we didn't quite know how to overcome that. I mean, there was some good suggestions there. I'll ask the audience if you want to throw some ideas over in the chat. If anyone in the audience has found a way to overcome that, or has any other ways that you can help foster a culture of innovation among everyone at a business, not just the principal owners of innovation, I wouldn't mind seeing that in the chat. We'll bring that up as well. All right, let's see, where do we want to go next? So one of the first questions we got asked by the audience, and again, thank you, Susan, for that question, and thank you, everyone, for those questions. I'd love to spend all day just asking your questions. I really would. It just makes me feel good that we're answering people's questions out there. It really does. But we got a first question here. When there's uncertainty about the near-term future, which is what many retailers are facing today, how do you adjust innovation? Do you pick projects that have less risk, or do you kind of hold on to that? And I guess that's a derivation of my earlier question about mid and long term. So the question is, what about uncertainty in the near term future? How does that impact innovation? Roshan, you want to start on that one, or is that?
Sure,
Why not?
I'll take a step.
What the heck?
So right, like I've been in many organizations when there's an initiative to look at different projects, innovation projects, and you put it on a 2x2 quadrant, and you say like level of effort, level of opportunity, and level of risk. And everyone goes to the lowest bottom quadrant of risk and says, these are the ones that we want to try. Because companies hate risk. And there's many attributes of organizations that discourage risk, which thereby discourage innovation. They love to minimize risk, and the easiest way to minimize risk is then to minimize initiatives that include innovation and instead do iteration instead. I feel like there's an opportunity, instead of I think we need to do away with trying to minimize risk. Because if you minimize risk, you won't do anything ever that really has any innovation in it. The opportunity instead is to do things that are risky, but to find ways that then minimize the downside of the risk. So if you assume that something has a high likelihood of failure, and you're okay with doing something that has a high likelihood of failure, how do you structure the project in a way such that the failure doesn't set you back? And this can include a lot of things that was actually in this presentation earlier, right? How do you do a MVP such that you're not doing significant frontward-looking investments that then you're stuck with? How do you make decisions quickly such that you can fail quickly, where people aren't penalized for failing so that they're then okay with acknowledged, yeah, this doesn't work, we need to cut bait, we need to do something else? Because those failures may be just the steps on the way to a longer term success in the future. So I think getting organizations okay with risk and okay with failure such that they're able to move on is a great step to foster innovation, even when there is risk out there, because there's always risk out there. I'm not saying celebrate failure. I think we've heard stories of organizations that have like parties for the biggest failure of the year. I think that's a little crazy and wacko and out there. But instead, we have to be okay with failure, not punish teams or individuals for failing, but encourage them to take the next step and try again and have another at bat.
I think it's important to define the differences in failure, and Rachel, I'll get to you in a second, but I think two quick comments. One, I think that the bigger risk is not taking any risk, right? No risk is a risk in and of itself, and there's some inherent problems with that.
And that's never on the slide. That's never on the table.
No, that's never like, we're going to do nothing and here's Xerox, right? Or we're going to innovate and we're going to give it away. That's Xerox. Better example. Or General Motors, I worked for them in the 90s. I watched that decline. But in any event, so there's a risk in not taking risk. Rachel, I'll let you go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm trying to remember what I wanted to say. There are a couple. Right, so pass to me, and I'll give you some time. There was a question you asked a little bit ago that I wanted to opine on about sort of the momentum of innovation teams, and I do think this notion of quick wins, so to speak, and being able to articulate what you do and how you fit is super important. And I think, to build on a lot of what Roshan was saying, I think these are and statements, right? We're not saying you shouldn't focus most of your attention. Most of the attention should go to managing the business of today, right? There is a small but mighty team to then focus on what we're seeing that could impact the future that needs to attack it, and then figure out those connection points back to the world of today. So I actually don't think there are trade-offs that should be made. I think it's how we complement each other and work with each other. And I actually think it's a humongous balancing act and a lot of ands and an iterative process. The other thing I want to say is that the world of agile, and this is Tim's world, supports this, right? If we can react more nimbly, and we can now, to being iterative, changing and reacting to things that you put into the marketplace, and also framing it up as such, embrace it, own it, but change it. And so that's what agile has helped us and many organizations to do, is you can react more nimbly, and that is a core foundation to being able to be innovative in the first place.
Yeah, the point I wanted to make with Roshan, I thought was really interesting, was his discussion on failure. I think I agree with him. I think celebrating failure isn't the right tack. At least I don't understand that as an approach. What I would say is failure is like any other experience in that you can learn from it. And I've had some doozies in my retail career, and you absolutely learn for them, right? As my brother and I used to run a family company, Vintage Tub and Bath, and we had 40 employees and doing 40 million a year in revenue, and you'd get some doozies in there, you'd make a mistake, but you learned from it, right? It was one of those tuition payments to the University of Life, and if you didn't make the mistake again, well, then it's kind of like an investment. And so I don't want to celebrate failure, but I don't want to crush people for it either if it was unavoidable or understandable, or it was a calculated risk and we tried it. Um, let's talk technology a bit. Now, Sean Puckett, one of our attendees, thank you, Sean, for asking this question. He says, do you view innovation as only new tech, or taking existing tech as an example and doing new things with it? So this will open up a broader conversation on technology innovation. That's another free ball for anyone to pick up.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start. I'll say it for us, it's definitely both, right? We definitely do not limit ourselves to just saying what's the most interesting thing coming down the pipe, which is partly why we talk about putting these on different horizons, right? Because if we're only focusing on something that's out there like metaverse or something, we're going to get distracted, right? We're looking at the current technology as well and how it can apply to our business and how it might change how we operate. So to use Rachel's analogy, it's an and. We got to do both of those things at the same time.
And I totally agree. And I think to answer Sean's question, one way that we've seen that is successful to also do this, to be able to use old tech to solve new problems, is to provide briefs that are kind of outlining what the problem that you're trying to solve is, like really starting from a problem first type of approach, and then evaluating tech, whether it be new tech or old tech, that can solve that problem. But I think a lot of people, and there's a time and a place for this too, are, metaverse is a great example, or blockchain in general is a good example, where people just start doing things with those with tech in those areas, but are not kind of solving real problems with them. And there's a place to explore that and just kind of have fun and try out new things. But I think for a lot of kind of the more maybe level 2 or level 1 types of innovations, those are the ones that really should start kind of with a problem first.
And sometimes the two come together. Like, how does the new tech augment the old tech, and how do you package things in different ways to Rima, to your point, to solve that customer need in a different way? And it's about evolving it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to see how the technology quickly, you can see where it gets picked up fast. Like, nothing wrong with the metaverse. I think it's a very fascinating topic. And I think there's definitely room there for real retail expansion and opportunities. Virtual reality, augmented reality, furniture companies love it. But boy, when generative AI hit, oh yeah, that just kind of cleared the decks of where everyone's going to be paying attention to. And I think that's interesting and worrisome at the same time when something is so massively sweeping, so broadly and deeply sweeping. And so it's not just that everyone's rushing to figure out what to do with it, right? Well, one of the previous webinars we had, one of our speakers was aggregating all of his customer feedback on a product and asking ChatGPT, what don't what do people not like about this? Boom. there it is, or aggregate all of my reviews into a single, like Zagat-like guide reference, so we can understand at a glance what 5,000 reviews are doing. And so I think there's no real problem there. But let me ask this: what are the ethical implications here? Where does technology hit a boundary that you're like, that's creepy, or that's not really right? I mean, there's certain GDPR protections and the like those are hard walls. But short of that, there's some gray areas. Do you deal with that, or you just kind of take it as it comes? Is it a corporate values thing? um, Rima, again, I hate to keep kind of starting with you, but you've worked with so many different companies, and you must have someone must have brought up the ethical limitations of something.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this? I'm sorry we didn't prep this. It just kind
I
of
can
came
give
to
an
mind as
example.
we're.
No.
Um,
I'm just thinking about examples. I've always really had a hard time with facial recognition technology, which was a hot like area of exploration for a while. I don't know, maybe 3 to 5 years back. And there was like a big front page newspaper article about a company that I remember having a strong debate about. And people don't like having their faces recorded and then used for purposes that they don't know about. So I think that's probably one of the areas that I draw the line. I think, of course, with AI, in kind of current day, there's a lot of questions about job replacement, and using AI to, things as simple as making your pizza or painting your nails, or in more complex things, even kind of data analysis roles at brands or retailers. I think that's always going to be a question. Like AI is here to stay,
it's not
and
going anywhere.
going to continue to evolve, and there are many different ways to improve um, the efficiency of how we do things. And I think that's really what it's about. It's like, how do you improve the efficiency of humans and people that work at our organizations to allow them to take on bigger tasks that require humans to do it, versus kind of the tasks that are repetitive tasks that AI can do, and allow humans the time to do that, and really like allow them to use their brains to do things like that.
The other thing I'd add to that is not necessarily on the ethical side of it, but on like the creepiness side of it. So we've tested things for customers, right? We're in the business of credit, right? And so we've tested ideas where we could do things that would make it much easier to apply for credit for a customer. But when you test it with them, it's a little bit too creepy, right? It's make it almost a little bit too easy for them. And so there's actually cases where we'll test with customers to figure out what's the purposeful amount of friction we actually need to add back in to processes to make people comfortable that there's a certain amount of security and comfort with what we're doing. So just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it if it doesn't give the customer a good sense of confidence in what we're doing. And so we'll test that with customers to figure out what amount of friction actually makes this product better for them.
And that goes to some of the question that, like, innovation isn't even about technology necessarily. It's adapting to the changing world around you. And whether it's ethics, whether it's consumer expectations, whether it's regulation, companies may need to innovate to address those things. I think that's especially notable this week, where paid search is being legislated by the government, which would then change how retailers have to market themselves. We had what's generally considered the most innovative company in the world have a keynote yesterday where they mostly focused on environmental issues and a connector change and repairability changes that were really fundamentally brought on by regulation in Europe and California.
Yeah, we're getting near the top of the hour here, so there's going to be two more questions I'm going to ask you. I want to talk about, can you de-risk by partnering with others? Is there something to be said about that? And finally, I really love leaving our audience with a more like a best practices, top tips, that type of like, where do you go next? So I'm gonna start with partnerships as a way of de-risking. Rima, I had a very vigorous head nod from you. So yet again, I
Yeah.
am going. Yeah, you're just never
I
going to
guess
want to
as
be
a
in none of
startup,
these webinars. I'm just constantly picking on you.
no worries. I guess as a startup VC person here, that's definitely what we're focused on. So I would say, of course, there's so much room to partner, probably obviously to partner with startups who really, I think brands and retailers often feel like they have to build something internally, or they have to like really protect their brand, and they want to have a lot of control over the technology, but don't necessarily have the internal resources or the talent to do so. And startups, some of them are really early stage, but a lot of them that are at kind of Series A, Series B have the ability to really partner with super large organizations and have the ability to scale and have thought through all the data privacy concerns and all of those types of things. And so they are great to partner with. That's maybe the obvious kind of use case for partnership. But I would also say like brands don't have to do it alone. Like a lot of venture capitalists, including us, and I have to give us a little plug, we meet with corporates, brands, and retailers all the time for free just to help kind of sift through the noise in startups. We get briefs from corporate brands who are like, here's a problem that we're trying to solve in sustainability. Here's a problem that we're trying to solve in picking and packing in grocery, whatever it may be. And we're like, hey, we see 2,000 startups a year. We're like, here's 3 or 4 startups that we think are the best in class for what you're trying to solve, and just help you sift through the noise. Because we know that corporates are getting a lot of inbound, and it's really hard when it's not your focus or what you're spending most of your time on, to kind of figure out where to spend your time and energy and who to meet with. So we try to help with that. A lot of consulting firms do that as well. So there are definitely options. And then I would also say leverage your peers at other firms. Again, I think there's a tendency to really keep things, especially as it relates to innovation, close to the vest. Like you don't want to share what you're doing publicly, maybe because it's too risky, or you don't want your competitors to know what you're doing. We actually host events. We just did one on generative AI where we hosted 5 brands from non-competing industries. So, one from beauty, one from department stores, one from athletic apparel, as examples. And we had 5 startups that we think are doing really cool things in generative AI come in and present and just start a conversation. Like, what's been working for each of the brands that has tried something in Gen AI already? What do you like about these startups? What do you not like? What would be a key risk if you were trying to do something with that? And I think it's like an easy way to learn from your peers.
That's awesome. Roshan, you've worked at brands that are kind of a house of brands. I'm assuming that even there, just kind of making sure that the different internal brands are talking to each other, I think would be kind of an obvious win. What are your thoughts here?
Right, and it goes back to the theme around reducing the cost of failing. And I think collaboration can do that by really increasing the amount of diversity. And by that, I mean diversity in terms of culture and diversity in thought. Because if you increase the areas of expertise, you balance the strengths and weaknesses across people responsible for driving change, you're much less likely to encounter blind spots, to focus too much on one area of the spectrum. For example, focusing on technology and not on the customer. You're less likely to do something potentially offensive to a certain group. So I think that collaboration really can enable diversity of thought, which can generate much better, significant, and less detrimental outcomes.
Outstanding. Synchrony, I think you've got an opinion on this, and then we're going to wrap up with just the top tip or top takeaway from this conversation for the audience. Synchrony, what's your thoughts on partnerships?
Yeah.
I think you'd approve of them.
Well, yeah, I would say we do. Yes, as I said from the beginning, I mean, we work with our clients, we work with ventures, we work with a lot of us. It's a key part of how we innovate. So, absolutely.
Cool. All right, so let's go around the board and we'll wrap this thing up. Tim, since you're the last to speak, I'm going to come right back to you. What do you think is the number one thing that the audience should take away from today?
I would say don't be random. Put it on paper, kind of what your strike zone is, and how to go after it.
Roshan, you're next.
If you acknowledge you need to change, embrace change and go for it.
Rachel.
Just get started. Work a project. It'll make sense once you work it.
And Rima, I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, I like what everyone else said, but I'll just reiterate what I just said in our last question is like work with your peers, get folks to help you and support you in your innovation journey.
All right, perfect. We are at the top of the hour. Audience, thank you so much for being with us today. Speakers, Rachel, Roshan, Tim, Rima, thank you all. I really do appreciate all the time and effort you put into making this a great webinar. Thanks to the Commerce Next team. We'll be back here on the 27th with our next webinar. Until then, have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you all later. Thank you so much. Bye-bye
Thanks
now.
for having us.
Bye. Thank you.